Hey, it's Professor Gould. In this video, I'm going to show you how to complete a Punnett Square worksheet and how to report your findings. So the first thing that you need to do is carefully read the whole question and then pay attention to what information you've been given and what information you have not been given. So this question asks about earwax, technically called cerumen. Most people have wet and sticky earwax that's kind of a brown or tan color. Some people have earwax that is dry and crumbly and a gray or light tan color. Wet earwax is conferred by a dominant allele. Dry earwax is the recessive trait. And then the first question is, what's the genotype of a person who has dry earwax? So look back at the question and you see dry earwax is the recessive trait. And you remember that in order to have a recessive trait, you have to not have the dominant allele present. Now, this doesn't tell us anything about the kind of dominance for this trait, so we can assume it's simple dominance, just one dominant allele, one recessive allele. It also hasn't said anything about the trait being sex-linked, so we can assume that this is an autosomal trait. So everybody's going to have two copies of it. The person with the recessive trait is going to have two copies of the recessive allele, and we're using E's. I like to use letters that you can't mistake the uppercase and lowercase letters, so like S's are really hard to use because the two look the same. So I like to use letters where they're different. All right, so the person who has dry earwax is showing the recessive trait, and so they're going to have two copies of the recessive allele. Okay, so that's the first part. All right, in our second part of our question, it asks, draw a Punnett square to show the probabilities for the offspring of two people who are both heterozygous for earwax. So the first thing you need to do is just remind yourself, what does heterozygous mean? That means we have one of each allele. And so for this, that would be a big E and a little e. All right, so then I've given you a Punnett square here, and this is a text table, so you can actually just type in it. So remember that we're going to put one parent here and one parent here, and each parent is going to give one allele to the offspring. So the offspring end up with two alleles. So each parent can either give a capital E or a lowercase e. Okay, so we put that there and we put that there. So those are what the parents could possibly give to the offspring. And then we just copy down the letters. So in this square, we have two big E's. And then in this one, this gets one big E from here and one little e from here. This one gets one big E and one little e. And this one gets two little e's. Okay, so that's your Punnett square. You're done with your Punnett square. Okay, now there's one more part to this question, and that is, what are the probabilities of the offspring? And this is the part where if people are going to run into trouble, they run into trouble here. So first of all, what you need to do when you're showing your probabilities is you need to list all of the possible genotypes. And in this case, the genotypes are big E, little e, little e, little e. And you can say homozygous dominant, heterozygous, homozygous, recessive, doesn't matter, okay? However you want to say it. And then the probability is what chance is there for each offspring to have this genotype. So we have four possibilities here, and each one of these could be one offspring. Now, this does not mean that if these two individuals have four children, they will have one of each of these, okay? What it means is that there is a 25% chance or 1 in 4 chance each time they have an offspring that the offspring will have one of these genotypes, okay? So we have one big E. So that is, the probability is either 1 out of 4. So there's one big E out of 4 possibilities, or 25%. Now, heterozygous. There are 2 of those. So the probability is either 2 out of 4 or 50%. And then the little e, homozygous recessive is again either 1 out of 4 or 25%. Okay, so there's a 25% chance the offspring is homozygous dominant, 50% chance the offspring is heterozygous, 25% chance the offspring is homozygous recessive. Okay, now the phenotypes. There are 2 possible phenotypes. One is wet earwax, and the other is dry earwax. Okay, wet earwax is conferred by the dominant allele, which means that all 3 of these possibilities result in wet earwax. So there's actually a 3 out of 4 or 75% chance that the offspring have wet earwax, and only 1 out of 4 or 25% chance that the offspring have dry earwax. That is how you are going to report your findings and your results on these Punnett squares. Okay, I want to see the list of genotypes and a percentage or a fraction for each one, and what the phenotypes are. And this is one thing that people forget. They get down here and they're like, whatever, so the wet earwax is the big E. No, the phenotype is the big E. No, the E is the genotype. That's the allele. The phenotype is the physical expression of that allele. So it's the wet earwax or dry earwax, because that is what we were asked about up here. And that is how you do your Punnett squares.